Good afternoon to everybody and welcome to this side event on human rights and challenges facing legal and judicial systems in the United Arab Emirates. United Arab Emirates is a member of the Human Rights Council, has ratified some international conventions, the Convention Against Torture, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and the Convention on the Right of the Child, and lastly, the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. But the United Arab Emirates hasn't ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, neither the Covenant on Social, Economic and Social Rights, nor the International Convention on the Protection of Rights of All Migrants, and the Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. The United Arab Emirates has ratified none of the articles for the acceptance of individual complaints procedures, and it accepted only for the procedure of inquiry for the Convention Against Torture. So today the main issue is the challenges facing legal and judicial systems in the country, and we have the honor to have with us the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the independence of judges and lawyers, who presented a report from a visit she made last year, where she touched the main challenges, among others legal uncertainty, independence and impartiality of the judiciary, accountability and disciplinary measures, fair trial, due process, and administration of justice. I will just quote some of her conclusions and recommendations. In the report, she said, despite commendable progress, the current judicial system in the United Arab Emirates faces challenges that negatively affect the delivery of justice, the enjoyment of human rights, and the public's confidence in the judiciary. She also said that the challenges and shortcomings when looking at the independence, impartiality, transparency, competence, and efficiencies of the justice system. And in her recommendations, she touched many points about legal uncertainty, independence and impartiality of the judiciary, non-national judges, accountability and disciplinary measures, fair trial, due process and administration of justice, women in the justice system, prosecution services. But without any further delay, I will give you the floor and you can present your report, please.
Mr. Chair, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I would like first to warmly thank the International Center for Justice and Human Rights for inviting me today to present the findings of my country visit to the United Arab Emirates. As most of you surely know, this council session was my last as a special rapporteur on independence of judges and lawyers, and this event is the last one I attend in my official capacity before going back to my day job in Brazil. As of 1st of August, a new special rapporteur will take over, and I encourage you to continue bringing to his or her attention the situation in the United Arab Emirates. Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you may have read my report, some copies of which are in the back of the room, both in English and Arabic. And in order to leave sufficient time for the other panelists to present their views and stories, I will try to be brief. From the outset, I'd like to note that it is important to distinguish the legal framework from the practice, as the independence of judges and lawyers must not only be ensured de jure, but also de facto. An adequate legal framework is fundamental to ensure and protect independence of judges and lawyers and guarantee a fair and efficient administration of justice. This is why I have relentlessly advocated for the principles of separation of powers and the independence of the judiciary to be enshrined in states' constitutions and the other fundamental laws, for the legislation regulating the judiciary and the legal profession to be in line with international standards, including those related to fair trial. An adequate legal framework is nevertheless not sufficient, as shown in many countries around the world. Concrete measures must be taken by the relevant authorities to respect and ensure the independence of the justice system and its actors in practice, as well as to sanction any action that infringes upon this independence. Ladies and gentlemen, it was important for me to recognize the efforts made by the authorities to improve the justice system and the positive results of the last decades. I believe that I reflected fairly these positive achievements in my report. I also welcome the recent initiatives that were brought to my attention after my visit, some of which may have been triggered by the recommendations I have made in my preliminary remarks in February last year. In the report, which is constrained by a tight word limit, 10,700 words, I strived to highlight the concerns that, in my view, were the most pressing. I will now give you a short overview of some of these concerns. The federal system of the United Arab Emirates is complex and can be difficult to understand. As a result, it is sometimes difficult for the public to know where the boundaries lie between the federal and local justice system. There is also a reported lack of consistency in the application of federal laws across the different emirates. All of this creates ambiguity and mistrust towards both law enforcement authorities and the justice system. Moreover, some important pieces of legislation, such as the recent law on combating terrorism crimes, are in breach of the principle of legality, which requires that crimes are enshrined in legal provisions that are clear, acceptable, predictable, and made public. The independence of the judiciary is currently undermined, both de jure and de facto. For instance, the principle of separation of powers is not explicitly guaranteed in the Constitution, and in the administration and financial supervision of the courts is a competence currently exercised by the Minister of Justice, which means executive. The composition of the Supreme Council of the Federal Judiciary is problematic, as is the procedure for the selection of judges. I heard reports and allegations of pressure exerted by members of the executive, prosecutors, and other state agents, in particular members of the state security apparatus, on both judges and prosecutors. Issues related to the independence of judges are further compounded by the fact that a large number of judges are non-nationals. While the appointment of judges of different nationalities may not be inherently problematic, the main issue about non-national judges in the UAE is the temporary nature of their contracts, which leaves these judges extremely vulnerable to undue pressure and interference. At the center of my report are concerns about the serious allegations of violations of due process and fair trial guarantees I heard during my visit, especially with regard to state security-related offenses. As I orally stated before the Council, most of the people accused of state security crimes are arrested without a warrant, taken to secret detention facilities, subjected to torture and or other forms of ill treatment. Their access to legal counsel is extremely limited. In addition, these cases are considered in first and last instance by the Federal Supreme Court, denying defendants their right to a review of their conviction and sentence by a higher tribunal. I'm also concerned that over the past few years, more than 200 complaints relating to torture and ill treatment have been presented before judges and prosecutors, but that those complaints have not been appropriately investigated or taken into account in judicial proceedings. The lack of serious investigations in that time of allegations encourage impunity for perpetrators. It also constitutes a violation of the obligations of the United Arab Emirates under the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. Moreover, and according to information received, in many high-level cases heard before the State Security Chamber of the Federal Supreme Court, hearings were held in closed sessions or with limited public access. Exceptional circumstances can warrant that all or part of the public is to be excluded from court hearings. Nevertheless, such exclusion must be clearly motivated, and the judgment, including essential facts, evidence, and legal reasoning, must be made public. The publicity of hearings ensures the transparency of the proceedings, thereby providing an important safeguard for the defendant. In the report, I also noted my concerns that women are prohibited by law from becoming federal judges and federal prosecutors. Those discriminatory provisions are in breach of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, to which the United Arab Emirates acceded in 2004, and are therefore unacceptable. Women still face institutional gender discrimination in many facets of the justice system, including when filing complaints with the police or appearing before the courts. Judges, prosecutors, and even lawyers show the gender bias and discriminatory attitudes and practices present in society in the United Arab Emirates. I am convinced that a more representative and gender-sensitive judiciary could play a determining role in empowering women to gain access to justice, claim their rights, and break patterns of gender discrimination and impunity in cases of violence against women. Regarding the federal public prosecution, I am particularly concerned that it is still under the de control of the executive, which jeopardizes its autonomy. Indeed, the public prosecution was established under the direct supervision and control of the Minister of Justice, and the selection of prosecutors is carried out by the Minister of Justice and approved by the Cabinet. I have heard serious reports which indicate that the prosecution services are often influenced by members of the executive of the state security services. Prosecution services should be autonomous, and prosecutors should perform their functions in an independent, objective, and impartial manner in compliance with the law and international legal principles. Finally, I am concerned about the absence of an independent, self-regulating bar association that oversees the process of admitting candidates to the legal profession, provides for a uniform code of conduct, and enforces disciplinary measures, including disbarment. The establishment of such an independent association is a key element in ensuring the independence of lawyers. At the moment, the executive is extensively involved in the admission and registration of lawyers, as well as in disciplinary procedures against them, which is incompatible with the basic principles on the role of lawyers, as it undermines lawyers' independence. I am alarmed at the reports that some lawyers who take up cases related to state security have been harassed, threatened, and had pressure exerted on them, including through constant surveillance, public campaigns of defamation, and the arbitrary deportation of non-national lawyers. Lawyers should never be identified with their clients or their clients' causes as a result of discharging their professional functions. And they should be free to prepare the best defense possible for their clients in compliance with the principle of equality of arms. Impunity surrounds such breaches of the independence of the legal profession has had a chilling effect on lawyers, and it has now become extremely difficult to secure a lawyer in state security-related cases. Many lawyers refuse such cases or drop them early on owing to the pressure placed on them. That's the reality. Ladies and gentlemen, as you would have seen in the report, I addressed a total of 42 recommendations to the authorities of the United Arab Emirates. I also strongly encourage the UAE to continue engaging with human rights mechanisms. In particular, I suggest that they invite the Special Rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism, and the Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances. I encourage you, in your respective capacities, to follow up on these recommendations. I will ensure to communicate my concerns regarding the UAE to my successor, and can only hope that she or he will follow up on them as well. Thank you for your attention.
I thank you, Madam Special Rapporteur, for the presentation of your report. I am sure that we will have some questions at the end of the presentations. And now we will listen to first-hand testimony by Mr. Abdul Razak Al-Aradi, who will be introduced by Mr. Dyke. Please.
Thanks very much. Look, we've gathered here today to talk about challenges in the human rights situation in the United Arab Emirates. What better way is there to draw attention to precisely this pressing matter than to have somebody who can speak with absolutely first-hand knowledge about the situation? Abdul Razak's brother, two brothers, Salim Al-Aradi, currently detained in the UAE, was arrested in August 2014, one of 10 Libyans arrested, 4 of which were later released. And no information has been provided about his arrest to his family for a prolonged period of time, indeed to this day. And now we are honoured, really, to have Abdul Razak amongst us as the family starts to speak out. And they've just come from Canada, and I think Abdul Razak might mention a little bit about that. He'll tell us about his brother and his family and the effect that that has in a very personal way on what the Special Rapporteur has been talking about, what Khadija will talk about, what I will talk about. It frames why we're here. And for that reason, it's an enormous pleasure that I'm looking forward to hearing what Abdul Razak has to say. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, respected speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to thank Ms. Safwa Isa and the International Center for Justice and Human Rights for organizing this event and inviting me. My name is Abdul Razak Al-Aradi. I am here to share a humanitarian ordeal my many Libyan families, including mine, have had to go through for the last 9 months. For over 23 years, members of our family have lived in the United Arab Emirates. 2 of my brothers, Salim and Muhammad, already relocated to the UAE to start an international company in home appliances. This company is still in operation today in Dubai. This picture shows Muhammad and Salim. They are rewarding one of the Chinese entrepreneurs. The UAE has been a country that both Salim and Muhammad valued, and they worked very hard to contribute to its growth. My brother Salim is a Libyan-born Canadian citizen. He has a beautiful family, 4 daughters, Marwa, Noor, Rayhana, and Yasmin. He has 1 son, Muhammad. His children have not seen him for nearly 300 days. Marwa, who is 17 and in a high school in Windsor, Canada, Ontario, Canada, has championed her father's case and is fighting for his freedom. Noor and Muhammad cannot comprehend what they have been told about their father. They suffer in sadness each day. Rayhana and Yasmin believe their father is on an extended business trip. On August 18, 2014, both Muhammad and Salim were approached separately by a UAE state security agency. They were questioned, their properties were searched without a warrant, and they were arrested on the spot. No accusation or charges were provided to their family at that time of arrest. Salim was on an annual vacation in Dubai with his elder mother, wife, and children when he was arrested. This is one of the pictures that they have taken during the vacation. The United Arab Emirates denied having detained my brothers. Our family did not know their whereabouts or if they were alive until we received a call after 2 months and 9 days. Salim called his wife and informed her that he was alive, and he asked about his mother and his children, and the call was ended. Within a similar period, 8 other Libyan businessmen were detained in a systematic approach. Soon after, Amnesty International issued an urgent action, and Human Rights Watch issued a report on the detainment. All of the families received no responses as to why their loved ones were detained. All of the 10 businessmen were residents of the UAE for decades, extremely respected in their profession field, law-abiding residents, and had no known political involvement or affiliation in the UAE or Libya. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch reported the detainment as considered enforced disappearance and arbitrary under international law. Our family remained without communication with both Salim and Mohammed until December 2014. Randomly, Mohammed and 3 other detainees were released, placed on an airport and deported out of the UAE. My brother Mohammed, a man who was invested extensively in the United Arab Emirates, lives with 4 unanswered questions. For what reason he was detained? Why he was arrested? Why he was treated this manner? Why he was deported out of the country? And why his brother Salim is still detained? During this initial period, the detainees were held in undisclosed location. In January 2014, Salim was relocated to Al-Watba prison in Abu Dhabi. Since then, his wife Alia was allowed to visit him once, and they were received only 2 calls. During the visit, an officer stood near them within earshot and was listening to their conversation. It is also very clear that the 2 phone calls were monitored. I am very concerned about my brother Salim's health. Salim suffers from serious health conditions, some pre-existent and others due to prison conditions. He has high blood pressure, asthma, and high cholesterol, and vulnerability due to an open heart surgery which he had before prison time, before he was detained. Salim has had a major weight loss, eye infection, and bronchitis. Our most serious concern is that he was developed worse condition in his back related to the discs in his spine from sleeping on concrete floor for months. And we know that he is in continuous extreme pain. Salim has been denied access to medical aid for majority of his time in detention, with the exception of a single examination from a specialist after 9 months of detainment. Salim's most basic human rights have been violated. He was held in communicado detention for 4 months. He has not been provided with legal representation, let alone legal representation of his own. He has not been provided adequate access to his family. I am not a lawyer, but I cannot comprehend that 1 visit with guards in the room and 3 monitored phone calls in 9 months can be considered adequate access. He has been denied adequate medical care. After months of requesting a specialist for his back, he was given 1 examination last month in which he can only be examined for 1 issue. Salim remained in solitary confinement for the first 114 days of his detainment, and our family is also very concerned about his safety and that he has been subjected to ill treatment. I don't know why Salim was arrested. Many people have said his detainment is politically motivated. But what I do know for sure is that after 290 days, he has still not been provided with the reasons for his arrest or being given the opportunity to challenge his ongoing detention. Salim's detainment is renewed every 30 days without due process. At no time during his renewals has even any evidence been presented or have any allegations been formally made. although I know the United Arab Emirates constitutions and laws does not allow for such a detainment and treatment. It appears that they were not applied to Salim nor Mohammed. The Canadian mission has been helping our family from the start with counselor assistance. The Libyan mission recently visited Salim and the other detainees for the first time. Our family appreciates any effort made to date on behalf of Salim, but his medical condition is worsening. His health is in jeopardy, and he is still not home with his family and kids. This ordeal needs to be resolved urgently. Our family is hoping Canada and Libya will continue to work through diplomatic channels to bring this situation to an end. I have come to Geneva on behalf of Salim and his family to meet with the Special Procedure Branch of the Office of the High Commissioners for Human Rights. Finally, because of high school examination, Salim's daughter Marwa could not be here with us, but she asked me to share her words with you. I quote, "My name is Marwa Al-Aradi. I am 17 years old. My last memory with my father was sipping our hot chocolate at the cafe in Atlantis. Resort in Dubai. It was my birthday, and he told me that he was proud of me. This was the last day I saw my father. I have many questions for the people who took my father. I spent 7 months hoping they would let him go, but now I have decided to fight for my father's freedom. I fear for my dad's life, and he needs to come home. I hope the United Nations will help me reunite my family again. I leave you with these words. Thank you." I also have a video of Marwa I'd like to ask your permission to listen to, please.
She told me that yesterday they came at midnight, and then they called from the reception and they asked your father to come down for a few minutes, and then they took him. We grew up in Vancouver, and then my father decided to go to Dubai so that he can run his business there. The last time when we went with my father, we were on vacation, and it was in Dubai. And I remember that time he used to swim with us all the time and have fun. And at midnight, at that day, somebody called from the reception. And it was a man from the security service. He asked my father to come down for a few minutes so that he can ask him some questions. My mom didn't feel okay about it. She felt that there's something wrong. She insisted to go down with my father. And they talked with my father for a few minutes, and then they took him. They never told us the reason why. They just took him, and that's it. It's hard, especially I'm 17. Yeah, it's hard. Sometimes I don't know what to do. Sometimes I cry, sometimes I don't know. He was a good man. He had a lot of friends. Everybody respected him. I don't remember, he was never involved in politics. It's unfair for him to be in such a situation, especially he did nothing wrong. Sometimes hard to deal with trying to fight for my father and trying to work hard for my grades in school. So it's sometimes difficult to manage both. I started a Facebook page and a Twitter account, as well as a blog, and there's over 2,500 Canadian people who signed the petition of that blog. The support of the Canadians, their comments, it's been like overwhelming, like seeing people commenting such nice positive comments. I want to show best and do the best I can so that hopefully it comes into a conclusion where my father is released and that's it.
I thank you for your testimony, which gives an idea of the problem that one can face when dealing with the judiciary in the United Arab Emirates. And now I give the floor to Mrs. Khadija Namar, who is a legal officer at Al-karama. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's hard to speak after such a heartbreaking video. I'm the regional legal officer for the Gulf at Al-Karama. We're an NGO based in Geneva, and we deal with 4 main violations, which are extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detention, torture, and enforced disappearance. We work mainly and quasi-exclusively with the mechanism, with the UN human rights mechanism. So it means mainly working group on arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, and special rapporteurs on torture, or, for example, with Ms. Knowles. In the past, I have been dealing with lots of cases, just like the ones we are presenting today, and I'm very happy to meet you today to be able to work also on this issue. One of the main cases, so in the past 3 years, we have been dealing with cases just like this one that follows exactly the same patterns over and over again. One day, someone asks someone who in the UAE, someone from the state security, either summons or go to someone else's house or workplace to ask questions. And after that, the person is arrested, of course, without a warrant and without being explained the reason why this person is being arrested. And then the person is taken to an unknown prison in an unknown location and denied the right to call his family, denied the right to legal counsel, and denied other rights like the right to have his medication, for example. And then most of the time what happens is that these persons are put in solitary confinement, subjected to physical and psychological torture until they accept to sign statements that are already written by the authorities that incriminates these people for acts they have never done. And these statements that the detainees are not even allowed to read beforehand constitute the sole basis for evidence in front of trials that do not respect any single fair trial rule. So this is unfortunately what we have been seeing a lot for the past few years. One of the main cases, maybe you have heard about it, is the case of the UA94, for which we sent a request for opinion after their detention. And the working group on arbitrary detention, which is in charge of cases in which individuals are detained without being given fair trial guarantees or for reasons, for acts that fall under a freedom or a right, such as the right to freedom of expression or the right to freedom of assembly and association, issued an opinion qualifying the detention as arbitrary. And this has been the case for all the complaints we have been sending to the working group on arbitrary detention. For all the cases that have been referred to us, the working group systematically decided that in his opinion, the detention were clearly arbitrary, the main reason being that the violation to the rights of the individual were so severe that there have been no way basically the trial would have been fair here. So there are violations here, both in the proceedings, on the way the authorities behave, but also on the acts that are considered as criminals. Most of the time, the acts are falling under the rights to peaceful assembly, to peaceful association, to peaceful expression, and the right to opinion. And these are rights and freedom and should not be prosecuted as crimes. But unfortunately, and given especially the way security state crimes and especially the crime of terrorism is being defined in the law of 2014, it has an extremely vague and broad definition that do not even encompass the act of violence that is necessary, basically, to qualify an act as terrorist. And when Ms. Gabriela Knaul said in her report to the UAE authorities that, for example, the crime of terrorism was defined in such a vague and broad way that it basically that the principle of legality and legal certainty, which means that you have to know what are the crimes that you can be prosecuted for. They should be in the law, they should be made public, and they should be defined in a very precise way. The UAE, I saw that in their comments to the report, in their answer, basically just denied the definition of the principle of legality as it is and just said, no, we just need to put it in the law. Whatever the definition is, as long as it's in the law, we consider that it's okay. So, and this is to go to my third point here that I wanted to highlight, which is the lack of consideration and the lack of respect of international standards and international human rights law standards by the UAE, which are, and it must be recalled, a member of the Human Rights Council. When it comes from a member of the Human Rights Council, which are states that are supposed to uphold the standards of human rights law to the highest standards, right? So here we have a country that not only refuses to apply the most basic principle of international human rights law, but also when we send complaints, for example, in the case of UAE 94, we do send complaint to the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which contact the Emirati authorities to have their comment on the allegations. The UAE will either not answer or answer in a way that basically dismiss all allegation as being fallacious and not being proven. And this is the attitude of the UAE basically when they face criticism on these very practices, that, oh, it's not proven, but there is documented cases by Al-Karama, by Amnesty, by Human Rights Watch. And this is something that is extremely problematic here, and we have also, when we look at cases, when we see cases such as the situation we've been talking about today, but all the other situation of Emirati people who are also detained arbitrarily today, is how to make sure that the UAE takes seriously their engagement under the Convention Against Torture first, but also their engagement as a member of the Human Rights Council, as the member of international community that has to respect and to enforce these rights that are among the most fundamental rights. So these are ideas that I wanted to share with you, and that is extremely important for us and as NGOs, but also for experts within the UN, to make sure that states respect their conventional obligation and also respect decisions and opinions taken by the UN mechanism, and in these cases release these persons whose detention has been considered as arbitrary by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. Thank you very much. I guess we'd have the...
I thank you for your contribution. And now I give the floor to Mr. Drewery Dyke, who is a researcher in the Middle East and North Africa program of Amnesty International. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for the talks up to now. And I think the legal and the personal side of the challenges that the UAE faces, I think, have been well set out. Amnesty International is a campaigning organization. My role here today is to provide support to the Al-Aradi family and many others, those convicted in the UAE 94 trial that Khadija has just referred to. We've been campaigning for quite a long time, international campaign, as per Amnesty's remit, for Dr. Mohammed Al-Rukn, a lawyer. And indeed, in respect to his case, Gabriela Knaul, Special Rapporteur, did say that there was this confluted, the kind of bringing together of the notion that the lawyer is somehow responsible for the acts that their clients are alleged to have committed. So as I say, I'm here to support, to lend a voice and add our voice to what we have already heard. And for that reason, I want to make just 3 very simple points. Khadija has already touched on one of them. The first is in respect to cooperation with and respect for human rights discourse. We heard this week that the permanent representative, Ubaid Salim al-Za'abi, had commented that the United Arab Emirates was committed to strengthening protection of human rights in the UAE. And that's great. That's wonderful news. The response that the government gave in respect to Special Rapporteur working on trafficking was commendable. He noted that they'll take into consideration well-founded recommendations and will improve the legal and judicial system in respect to the comments and the reports of the Special Rapporteur. And again, wonderful. It sounds good. But up to a point. They referred to untrue allegations, not specific criteria, and a lack of detail. And that's very concerning. It's a concern because we know through our contacts with Emirati authorities that there are people in the UAE government in positions of decision-making positions in the judiciary and so on, that there are people who are committed to human rights standards and the implementation of human rights standards such as they are in the UAE and indeed globally. But there is a culture of denial and secrecy. So if cooperation is taking place, in respect to denial, if cooperation is taking place, and it's termed to be, it's generally phrased, the words are, the commitments are general, they're lacking in the specific. Sure, there's been 1 or 2 very important decisions. I think there was a commitment, correct me if I'm wrong, Special Rapporteur Gabriela Knaul, in respect to reforming the State Security Chamber of the Federal Supreme Court that has no right to appeal, as we have been hearing. And I think there was, at some point, a commitment that should be changed. But Khadija just referred to 2 things that are very, very important in this regard already. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention opinions that was prompted by Al-karama have been ignored. They have been ignored. And that's no way to say that a government is cooperating with human rights organizations, human rights, the intergovernmental bodies such as the UN. I'm afraid, I don't want to say it, I'm afraid it's not true. They must cooperate and enact those decisions. And we'll see as Al-karama takes its work forward in respect to bringing those other opinions, other claims, to see what the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention will do. And secrecy, with regard to secrecy. Well, Khadija's mentioned that Al-karama and indeed others have tried to send trial monitors. And indeed some have got through, but not allowed in many respects into the courts. Human Rights Watch staff banned from the country. 10 days ago, an Amnesty International delegate to a conference on migrant labour banned, deported from the country. A trial monitor from Kuwait, a fellow GCC country, for the trial of the UAE 94, stopped at the airport, banned. So what is the UAE hiding? It's desperate. And it indicates, regrettably, this gradual narrowing of space that we see generally in respect to freedom of expression. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that in recent weeks, artists, members of an artist coalition, and indeed an academic body from a university in New York, have also been permitted from entering into the country. So it begs the question, why ban people? Why not allow people in? Okay, on the other hand, we heard with interest the recommendation that the Special Rapporteur made, that the authorities should invite, and indeed I hope they will invite other Special Rapporteurs and afford them effective cooperation and effective access to those detainees who've been held in Ar-Razin prison and the Wathba prison and so on. Those that we've heard from Abdul Razak have had their conversations monitored by authorities standing just feet behind them. The second point I want to touch on, indeed it's already been touched on, is, and I hate to use the word, it's torture. And it is the elephant that's in this room. And it's the elephant that's in the discourse about the human rights situation in the United Arab Emirates. When the Special Rapporteur went there in 2014, she left saying that there was credible evidence that torture was taking place. Now, we've gone a little bit beyond that, regrettably. And on the 30th of October in 2014, the government told us, in a letter that we published in a report that we issued in November of last year, that the Constitution prohibits torture. And indeed, the Special Rapporteur mentioned to us that there's a very important distinction between what the law says and what happens in practice. But the government also assured us that the Emirates Human Rights Association had investigated. Sounds good. So we wanted to talk to them too. But first on the substantive. We have documented cases of torture. The detail that this permanent representative to the UN has spoken of was in our November 2014 report. And we have presented the evidence. And sadly, again, as Khadija has already said, we have been met by assertions that, oh no, this didn't take place. But the specificity of the detail of Ahmed Ghaith al-Suwaidi has not been rebutted. Has not been rebutted. He said, when the trial started, he pleaded for the court to protect him and his family from state security. A university professor and former judge, Ahmed Azabi, said that security officials had hung him upside down and beat him on the soles of his feet until they became swollen. And there's others. Since, regrettably, some of the third country nationals, those who are not involved, who are not Emirati citizens, have been released, we heard a very disturbing story about a gentleman who said he was thirsty in the course of his interrogation, and he recounted a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, in which he said, look, there's a story in which Muhammad had given a dog some water out of a concern for its well-being. And he told me that once he said that, he was forced to get down and walk on his knees or crawl on his knees when he was beaten. They poured some water into a shoe and had him drink that, being beaten all the while. 71 of the defendants of the UAE 94 trial complained in court of ill treatment and torture. The Special Rapporteur mentioned that now that there was more than 200 cases that have not been adequately investigated. I really hate to say it, but we're talking about a country now which is serially torturing individuals in custody. We have got to admit it. And I think the authorities have got to realize this and face it. You know, it's not just the special rapporteurs, or indeed the working groups, but it's others who are saying it. And I know that there are people in the UAE who want to address it. It just needs a high-level commitment to say, we have the laws to deal with this, and we will deal with it. Now, I mentioned the Emirates Human Rights Association. They told me in a meeting I had with them that the Emirati detainees were facing 5-star hotel treatment. 5-star. But we asked them, under what conditions was their assessment made? Who made the assessment? We asked them to share the assessment with us. And regrettably, they've not been able to do so. It begs the need for an independent civil society in the country. And it is shocking that, in conclusion with respect to this issue, it is shocking that in June 2015 now we're talking about a country such as the UAE, with its level of development and education and so much more, that so many cases of torture are being reported and failed to be investigated. My comments in respect to the Emirates Human Rights Association bring me on to my third and last point, and that's simply the importance of freedom of expression. It's an inestimable a freedom. It underscores and precedes other violations for those able to speak out. And, you know, again, my colleagues have talked about how some of these issues have been conflated. What do I mean by that? I mean, Dr. Mohammed Al-Rukn, a human rights lawyer whose actions in respect to his own clients has been conflated with those of the trial of the UAE 94, and he's been put in jail. A man who formerly cooperated in many respects with the authorities. It's the direction of travel for freedom of expression in the country is not good. Again, I think my colleagues have touched on this, but starting from 2001 with a petition for greater transparency in the administration of justice through to 2015, we've seen a gradual closing of the space. The Special Rapporteur referred to the importance of having an independent jurist association. It was closed in 2011. And indeed, the ministry enforced rules that basically led to it being taken over. Teachers Association, and others. But I just want to touch very briefly on 2015 now, with an Omani detainee, a man who's spoken out on Twitter. The 3 sisters of Al-Suwaidi, who were detained for 3 months in respect to tweeting. 5 Qataris who were tried in absentia. Other Emirati nationals. Not many, but it's still going on. We don't have to look back to 2012 or, you know, the time when the 10 Libyans were detained towards the end of 2014. It's still going on. The laws that have been passed recently in respect to cybercrimes underscore the need for there to be a true freedom of expression in the country for lawyers and others to be able to speak out, and for organizations such as Al-Karama, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International to be allowed in the country and to speak. And I want to close in respect to this rather grim account with a human rights defender who's currently active in the UAE, Ahmed Mansour, who's not associated with Al-Islah or any of these other groups, and that much is recognized. But he's tweeting regularly in the past month that there have been cars parked outside his front door, that he's been monitored. It's just simply not on. It's not fitting for, as I said before, a country with the level of development and sophistication that the UAE is that Ahmed Mansour and indeed others should be treated in this manner. There's no voices left to speak out for violations of the type that we're talking about, and for that reason we're meeting here. We can't meet. I would love to have had this meeting in the UAE and have this had this discussion, but we can't. So I'll end there, but I want to end with a note of positivism by simply, again, just going back to the people, the professionals in the judicial system. There are many who want to see the UAE live up to its international human rights obligations and international human rights standards. There are many. We know them. We speak to them. They don't want to have their cover blown, if I can put it that way. And I just wish, it's a plea, that the governing authorities would listen to their own staff members and their own activists in the country, quite apart from what we have to say, and just to treat people with respect and human dignity. Salim Al-Aradi, detained for 10 months, deserves respect and not to face torture. 10 months later, not charged. So I think there is hope. Time will tell, but with that, I thank you.
I thank you for your presentation. And I think there is an issue that both you raised with Khadija. And this is the non-implementation of recommendations and non-respect of the decision taken by the UN human rights mechanism. So maybe the first question, I take advantage of my position, could be what can be done? And I mean, it's not just the case of the Emirates, but of many countries. So maybe with your experience, Madam Special Rapporteur, what do you think can be done?
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your presentation. I think, first of all, political will. This is the first step, I think, for having implementation of any recommendation. It's crucial to have political will. Not only in the paper, but also in some concrete actions that can show clearly that such kind of level of commitment with international human rights obligations. And I think we should continue pushing in order to try to build this political will, and if it will be necessary to help them to work for this implementation. I think they can count with us if they want, with the Special Rapporteur, with the special procedure mechanisms, and also with civil society, and also with their internal legal professionals. I think there is, this is the first step, necessary step for implementing any kind of recommendation. To have political will and to take some concrete measures and actions for implementing recommendations and start changing the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Khadija, do you like to add something?
Yes, of course. I mean, political will is at the crucial, is the cornerstone here. Although as a civil society actor who works in this international sphere, I think if political will doesn't come from inside, from the authorities themselves, they should be pushed by people with whom they share interests. It means that we need to have political will from other powerful countries with whom the UAE share big interests to sort of push them more into this human rights agenda rather than just focusing on security or financial issues. And this is something that actors, NGOs, should push for here within this very building, for example, by fighting for cases with the special procedures, but also by, in advocating like Amnesty does, and making these other countries remember, like, behind, and this is how they named your report, and I think it was very, very well put, that behind this sort of glittery image there is another reality. And so it's several mechanisms that you can use to sort of force this political will. And fortunately enough, there are countries in which there are democracies where public opinion counts. So this is when also advocating, and in Canada, in the US, in Switzerland, in the UK, to push governments to take these issues seriously into account in their bilateral relation, but also in this building.
Thank you. Julian, would you like to add something?
Now, just to echo exactly those points, political will, a bit of pushing for sure. But I just want to say one other thing too. The Special Rapporteur referred to it. Amnesty International and civil society and other groups are not against the UAE. We're not here just to prod and poke and criticize. We are here to cooperate too. So when some years ago the government of Yemen was in the process of developing a code of criminal procedures, it asked for our comments on it, and we provided the comments. They didn't implement all of them, but they implemented some of them and took it into consideration. So in respect to procedures and the development of law and practices, if there are issues that the authorities, the Emirati authorities, feel are or have been criticized for by us and others, we're by all means at their disposal to help develop alternatives. We do that with every state, in every country, at every time. Where there's a will, the point that the Special Rapporteur started by, where there's a will, there is a way. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now I open the floor for questions or comments. Please, sir. I just ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Khalid Al-Shair. I am head of Human Rights Committee in Bahrain Parliament. And I have my kids also, they have a UAE nationality. I just have a questions to the Special Rapporteur here. When I go through your report on visit the UAE, I noticed that your comments on the country are very thought, which hurt many citizens in the country. I mean in UAE. My question is, can you tell us why your report focuses more than the negative aspect your visit, putting aside the progress made by UAE? I mean the positive things. Frankly speaking, it's not possible for you to put some comments in a more and different matter. And the other questions, you have visit 4 countries, I believe. Why you don't mention any other country in your report? Badly. I believe why you don't mention how the UAE supporting the humanity on all over the world. Why you don't mention that UAE supporting the poor people all over the world? We know nobody is perfect. But we have to, if I want to mention something, I have to mention the negative and the positive things. Thank you.
I thank you. Please.
Thank you very much for your question. That's a really good question. First of all, I would like to clarify, I have visited not 4 countries, I have visited 14 countries around the world, and 14. And when we are invited to conduct a country mission in a specific country, we are invited, we set up dates, and after that we go to the country, we spend some time there, and we try to meet government, non-governmental institutions, try to meet victims, and try to gather as much information as possible. And after that, I have to write a report only about that country mission. So I have one report for each of these 14 countries that I carried out missions. So I have 14 reports related to the missions that I have conducted during my 6 years as a Special Rapporteur. So my report is focused only on the UAE because I have to write a report only about the UAE. And I have another report for Qatar, for Mozambique, for Portugal, Tunisia, Mexico, and so on. And I have a limit of work. I have to write my report in 10,700 words maximum. So I gather much more information to write a report with 20,000 words. If I could have done this, I have presented both positive, negative aspects equally. I have had the chance not to elect, I think, the main key issues that should be public and be advocated for improvement. I have acknowledged all the efforts made by the UAE, positive developments, but there are many things that should be done and should be improved. So I try to prioritize from all matters that I have heard what would be the most key ones. Because if the government, if the UAE do not achieve these key ones, it will be difficult for them to move forward, to go beyond. For these reasons, take into account the word limit that I have, I would like to explore more, for example, about the court structure, the local justice systems, the informal justice system. There are a lot to say. There is a lot, but it's impossible because of the word limit. And this is a UN rule. I cannot change this. Once I have a run report, and my assistant is here, 10,701 word, and they gave it back to me and asked me, please, you should delete one word. So it's really stricted. But I thank you very much for your comments. Thank you.
Any other question or comments? Please.
Hi, thank you very much for those comments. I'm from the International Campaign for Freedom in the UAE. We're a London-based campaign, and we talk quite regularly to Westminster politicians, and we're also hoping to talk to politicians in Brussels, and we talk to the media as well about some of the issues in the UAE. But given the report was so extensive, and given that there were so many different issues raised, what would you say were the key issues that we should be using and asking the UK government's politicians in the EU to raise when they discuss these issues with the UAE? And one of the things that has been coming back is that they say that they do raise concerns with the UAE. For example, Westminster have been saying they do raise concerns with the UAE in regards to human rights violations. But what are the key things that we should be talking about? What are the key messages to be getting out there?
Thank you. The key message for me today is that state security should be under control. During my mission, it was really difficult to understand or to try to find out or to get an answer from someone who controls, who manages, who is responsible for the state security forces. I asked this to the Minister of Interior, Minister of Justice, several and different actors. Nobody knows. State security should be under control of someone. Everybody should be accountable. If there is no accountability, impunity will be something. There is no respect to the law. There is no certainty. There is no trust and confidence in the justice system or in the police actions or in the institutions. It leaves the door open to any kind of action, and it will remain impune. I think this is the core issue today, is to send a message that everybody should be accountable, including institutions. Institutions and persons should be accountable.
Thank you very much. Any other question or comment? Yes, please. Introduce you.
Ahmed Al-Qasir, Human Rights Solidarity, Libya. Thank you, the panel, for their presentations. I'd like just to comment on the question about how to, not force, but at least get reform in countries like, for example, UAE, as a discussions about UAE today. Yes, it needs the political will from inside with it, and also the human rights or the civil society activism, and also pressure from outside. But I think it's also the other thing. The issue is really the United Nations system, and in specific here is the Human Rights Council. I think it's a travesty when you have countries that have so much record of abuse. It's not just the UAE. Many other countries are members of the Human Rights Council with their miserable record of gross human rights abuses and lack of freedoms. And I think it's really this calls for the mechanism by which such countries manage. The decision here is political. It's all lobbying and political and quotas and all this stuff. But reform in the UN needs to be done by which, for example, maybe civil society, NGOs, international NGOs, have a say as well on, who should be elected to the Human Rights Council. I think countries that are with bad record and they get elected to the Human Rights Council or to the to the other bodies that are concerned about international law, I think it's a travesty of justice, and it is like a way of exonerating them when their record is so miserable. So it's also the UN needs to be, really needs to get its act together. Maybe, I don't know how it is, but I think until the day that international civil society as organizations have a say in the works of the UN. I think until that day comes through, I think we will always see such countries with such abuses and such a miserable record get elected and sit, in here in this council, judging and listening and reviewing the human rights records of other countries. Maybe some of them are much more progressive and much better in respecting the rights of their citizens than those are sitting on this council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Drewery, I don't know if you want to comment on this. I think Amnesty has a position.
Well, chiefly our role is to campaign on all those countries, and indeed all as many countries in the world as possible with respect to their human rights record, and to publicize those as regards to reform of the UN and whether and to what degree that should be taken into consideration. I believe our colleagues who work in the UN, familiar with the UN system and how it works, are probably better placed to comment on that issue. So maybe that's something that we could discuss afterwards. But I mean, as I said at the very beginning, we're a research and campaigning organization. We'll try to work on as many countries as possible and make those findings public when those elections take place.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on this?
Well, the Human Rights Council is already known, for those who are sort of familiar with the UN system here in Geneva. We all know as NGOs that it's very politic, right? It's a lot of politics going on, and it becomes increasingly a sort of a vitrine, so to say, for countries to sort of, even what I've seen lately would be even states who take advantage of their seats within the Human Rights Council to push for resolution, especially when it comes to human rights and counterterrorism, for example. Some, especially countries in the Arab region on which we work, where they would push for an agenda where counterterrorism would be presented as a valid excuse to violate human rights, and these are resolutions that are passed at the Human Rights Council. So, but these are states, I mean, and depending on the states you have in the Council, of course, you'll have different sort of agenda that will conflict with each other within the Council. So it's not all monolithic or black and white, it's a bit more, you can see the different sort of political forces and agendas as per human rights are concerned within the Council. But we, as for example, as an NGO where we work in like very specific legal issues, we work with experts that are known to be not that are independent from the states, and these are the mechanism on which we will actually focus on. Which are the special procedures and the Human Rights Committee, the Committee Against Torture, Committee on Enforced Disappearance. So there are other mechanisms with which we can work, and I don't know. I mean, there can be a debate on whether we should have a council made of Human Rights Council made of states that violates them so widespreadly. But we can have this debate. Of course, it's I guess a 2-hour more long debate to have on the panel.
Thank you very much. Is there any other comment, question? Please, sir.
Jamal Awami from Libya Human Rights Solidarity. Thank you for your speeches here and the ideas that you gave us. I thank Abdul Razak actually very much for coming out as a family, that the family is usually the ones who suffers, who knows the day by day, and they live this trauma. The question is maybe to Abdul Razak and also to you all, that now the family has decided to really come out and fight for Salim. Now, how we can protect them? Because the pressure now on the UE, they will feel it. We can see that they feel this pressure. Now it's been always in the media. These cases have been to the Special Rapporteurs. So the pressure is coming from different ways, but how we can protect the families of the victims. Also, even the victims themselves, who we don't really have any contact with them after our discussion, after 2 hours from now.
I thank you. Mr. Aradi?
Well, I think as for my family, we took our own measures, which is, we get all the family members out of the UAE before we talked out, before we spoke out. We kept quiet for over 7 months, thinking that maybe the diplomatic channels will get Salim and the others released. We did not get any success yet. We decided to speak. As you have heard, still we are keeping the tone down. We believe that Salim and the others living detained in UAE, they are innocent. They should be freed right away. I mean, even we don't believe that there is any charges against them. We hope that whoever heard our message will do something to get them released. Thank you.
Anyone else want to comment?
This is precisely what we've been trying to do. I think it's, it makes me think over and over again in respect to what's happened to Salim's family and many, many others, countless others, frankly. The initial response from the authorities is keep quiet, it'll all be sorted out. Tens of cases have come to us months after the people have been detained, and they're finally tired and no longer able to keep quiet. I think our challenge, our collective challenge, is to chip away and erode at the perceived legitimacy of the defense, so-called defense, that the authorities have put up in respect to the case of Salim Al-Aradi and the UAE 94, those who were imprisoned after that unfair trial. And that means taking to Twitter. It means speaking out wherever you are. You happen to live here. And that's frankly what we do, to try and lead international campaigns with respect to Mohammed al-Rukn, Suwaidi sisters, and others. Campaign.
Any other comment or question? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I am Safa Isa, President of International Center for Justice and Human Rights. I want to thank our guests and for their presentation, what is very important and interesting. I want to add some ideas and some reflections. I think that what is shocking is as NGOs, when we work on the United Arab Emirates, especially on human rights issues, because this is the big problem there, is what is shocking is is the silence of governments, of especially European governments, when it is the case is from UA, and it is shocking to see how they are inactive when we speak about some real cases in UA. So I don't know what is the problem Is it about tourism, about financial issues or security problems? So I think this is why also there is a lot of problems there, but there is a big silence from the other governments. Also about the reprisals, I think there is a big problem now also is about the families. The families of victims of prisoners of conscience. In our NGO, in International Center, we have worked on especially kids. The problem of child of the prisoner of opinion, and we have many cases where there is travel ban for childs. Even for women and for daughters of these prisoners, and also work ban, studies ban. We have some cases where some girls are banned from pursuing their studies, university studies. So there is a big problem with this, because some travel bans are done without judicial decisions, so there is a big problem with this. So families are not able to advocate their cases, and they are in a real now silence, because they are afraid of the reprisals of the government. So this is a real problem now, with also human rights defenders there, with civil society there, because they are all afraid of these reprisals. So what we can do with this to improve the role of the civil society there, and to make also human rights defenders there and victims more able to advocate their cases, and more courageous to speak about their problems. Thank you. This is my...
I thank you for your comment. Is there any other question or comment? If this is not the case, I thank you very much for attending our meeting, hoping that the discussion will help in strengthening and improve the political will that we were discussing about. Thank you very much.